When Bram cornered her at the harvest fair and sneered, "Still alone, Rowan? No husband yet." The ground trembled, wolves dropped to their bellies, and a shadow stepped between them wearing a crown that could level mountains. Her ex didn't recognize the Alpha King of the Nine Realms. But Rowan did, because she'd kissed that mouth at dawn and woke entangled in his arms just days ago. Come back to my channel, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy the story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The bread at Briar's Hollow still tasted like dust. Rowan stood at the edge of the harvest fair, a wooden cup of cider warming her palms, and watched the villagers laugh and dance as if the world beyond their fences didn't exist. As if nothing had changed. As if she hadn't changed. But everything had. The girl who'd left this place 3 years ago with nothing but a threadbare pack and wounded pride was gone. In her place stood a woman who had walked through the Moonstone Forest, survived its teeth, and emerged with a secret burning bright beneath her skin, a secret she kept wrapped around her left wrist, hidden beneath leather bands. She shouldn't have come back. But her mother's letter had been desperate, the words shaky. "Fever won't break. Healers can't help. Please come home." So Rowan had returned to the village that never wanted her, to the people who had whispered that she was too quiet, too strange, too soft to ever amount to anything. She sipped her cider and tried not to remember the last time she'd stood in this square. Tried not to remember Bram's voice, loud and careless, telling his friends she wasn't worth the trouble of courting anymore. "Rowan?" She flinched. Turned. A woman with flour-dusted hands and kind eyes stood beside her, Marin, the baker's wife, one of the few people in Briar's Hollow who had never treated Rowan like a burden. "Marin." Rowan's smile came easier than expected. "It's good to see you. And you, dear." Marin's gaze softened. "I heard about your mother. How is she?" "Resting. The fever broke this morning." Rowan exhaled slowly. "I think she'll recover. Thank the goddess." Marin squeezed her arm. "And you? You look different." Rowan knew what she meant. The girl who'd left had been pale, hunched, trying to make herself smaller. The woman who'd returned stood straighter, moved with quiet confidence, and met people's eyes without flinching. "I suppose I am," Rowan said simply. Marin opened her mouth to respond, but a voice cut through the music and laughter like a blade through silk. "Well, well. Look who's come crawling back." Rowan's stomach dropped. She turned slowly, already knowing who she'd see. Bram. He stood near the ale tent, flanked by 2 friends who were grinning like dogs who'd cornered a rabbit. He looked the same, broad shoulders, easy swagger, a smile that had once made her heart race, but now only made her tired. His wife, a woman named Isla with bright eyes and a laugh like bells, stood a few paces behind him, her expression tight with something that might have been pity. Bram swaggered forward, and the crowd around them quieted, heads turning, eyes gleaming with the promise of gossip. "Rowan." He said her name like it was something sour. "Didn't think we'd see you again. Thought you'd run off to the city to find some fancy husband." Rowan said nothing. Just met his gaze steadily, the way she'd learned to do when facing down things far more dangerous than a man with a bruised ego. Bram's smile sharpened. He stepped closer. "So? Did you find one? A husband, I mean." The crowd leaned in. Rowan felt the weight of their stares, the hunger for her humiliation. She could have lied. Could have invented a merchant or a blacksmith, someone safe and distant. But something in her refused to bend, refused to shrink, refused to give Bram the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. "That," she said quietly, "is none of your concern." Bram laughed a loud, ugly sound. "That's a no then." "Figures. I mean, who'd want?" He never finished the sentence. Because the wind stopped. Just stopped. The music faltered. The dancers froze. Every conversation in the square died mid-word. And then the ground trembled. Not like an earthquake, like something alive had shifted beneath their feet, something vast and ancient and paying attention. Rowan's wrist burned. The hidden mark beneath her leather bands flared hot, and her breath caught as realization slammed into her chest. No, he wouldn't. He couldn't. A shadow fell over the square. The villagers gasped, stumbling back, and Rowan turned, heart-pounding, pulse roaring, toward the edge of the fair. A figure stood at the tree-line. Tall. Impossibly tall. Wrapped in black ceremonial armor that caught the dying sunlight like liquid night. A fur mantle draped over broad shoulders, pale as moonlight. And on his brow, a crown of black metal shaped like fangs, glinting with a power that made the air itself feel heavy. His eyes burned molten gold. Every wolf within 10 miles dropped to its belly and bowed. The villagers didn't understand what they were seeing, not really. They saw a stranger, a warrior, someone dangerous. But Rowan knew. She knew the way his jaw tightened when he was trying not to smile. Knew the scar along his collarbone from a childhood hunt gone wrong. Knew the way his voice softened when he whispered her name in the dark. Aldrich. Her husband. Her king. Her secret. He walked forward with the kind of grace that made grown men step aside without thinking, his gaze locked on her, only her, as if the rest of the world had ceased to exist. Bram, still standing too close, turned pale. Who? He stammered. Who are you? Aldrich didn't answer. He simply stepped between Bram and Rowan, a wall of muscle and ancient authority, and the air around him seemed to hum with restrained power. Then, slowly, deliberately, he placed his hand at Rowan's waist. The touch was possessive. Sure. Tender in a way that made the entire square gasp. Aldrich's voice, when he spoke, was low and deadly calm. She, he said, his golden eyes never leaving Bram's face, is not alone. A pause. A heartbeat. Then, softer, with a kind of reverence that made Rowan's knees weak. She is mine. The square erupted into chaos, whispers, gasps, someone's cup shattering on the cobblestones. But Rowan barely heard it. Because Aldrich's thumb was brushing the inside of her wrist, right over the hidden mark, and his gaze finally shifted to her, warm, fierce, and utterly unyielding. I told you I'd come if you needed me, his eyes seemed to say. And for the first time since returning to Briar's Hollow, Rowan smiled. A real smile. Because the girl who'd once believed she was weak had just realized something. She wasn't alone. She never had been. The silence that followed Aldrich's declaration felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, thrilling and terrifying all at once. Rowan could feel every eye in the square boring into her, could hear the frantic whispers starting to build like a gathering storm. But all of it felt distant, muffled, because Aldrich's hand was still at her waist, steady and warm, and his presence beside her was so overwhelming it made the rest of the world fade to shadow. Bram had gone deathly pale. His mouth opened and closed like a fish dragged onto land, no sound emerging. Behind him, his friends had taken several steps back, their earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist. Bram finally managed, his voice cracking. Who are you? Aldrich's expression didn't change. He didn't shout or snarl, or make any of the grand gestures Bram might have expected. He simply looked at him with those burning gold eyes, and the weight of that gaze was enough to make Bram's knees buckle. Does it matter? Aldrich's voice was soft, almost gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying. You've insulted my wife. Nothing you say now will change that. Wife. The word rippled through the crowd like a stone thrown into still water. Rowan felt her cheeks flush, but she didn't look away from Aldrich. Couldn't. Not when he was looking at her like she was the only thing in the world worth protecting. Bram's voice strangled itself. But she's from here. She's nobody. Careful. The single word from Aldrich made the temperature drop 10 degrees. Frost didn't form on the ground, but it might as well have. Every wolf within earshot whined and pressed lower to the earth. Bram stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet. Aldrich didn't pursue. Didn't need to. He simply stood there, a king in a village square, radiating the kind of power that made grown men remember why their ancestors had feared the dark. Then his hand moved from Rowan's waist to her hand, fingers interlacing with hers, and when he spoke again his voice had softened, not for Bram, but for her. Are you all right? 3 words. Simple. Quiet. But they undid something in Rowan's chest that she hadn't realized was still knotted tight. "I am now," she whispered. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, a touch so gentle it sent warmth spiraling up her arm. "I'm sorry I took so long. The border disputes in the Northern Realm." "You're here," Rowan interrupted softly. "That's what matters." For a heartbeat, the rest of the world truly did disappear. It was just the two of them, standing in a square that smelled of harvest apples and wood smoke, looking at each other like they were the only two people who'd ever understood what it meant to be seen. Then someone coughed. The spell broke. Rowan turned to find Maren staring at them both, her flour-dusted hands pressed to her mouth, eyes wide with shock that was quickly morphing into something that looked like delight. "Rowan," Maren breathed. "You're married." Before Rowan could answer, another voice cut through the crowd, sharper, colder. "Married to whom, exactly?" An older man pushed through the gathered villagers, his gray beard braided with leather cord, his walking stick thumping against the cobblestones. Gareth, the village elder. The man who'd once told Rowan's mother that her daughter would never amount to anything because she lacked spine. Gareth's eyes swept over Aldrich with open suspicion. "We don't know you, stranger. And Rowan left here unwed 3 years ago. So unless you have proof of this union, I'm afraid we can't simply take your word." Rowan's jaw tightened. Of course Gareth would demand proof, would try to turn this into some kind of village tribunal. But Aldrich's expression didn't flicker. If anything, he looked almost amused. "Proof," he repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. Then he glanced down at Rowan, one eyebrow raised in silent question. She knew what he was asking. They'd kept their bond hidden for a reason, because revealing it would put her in danger, would paint a target on her back for every enemy Aldrich had accumulated over his reign. But standing here, in the village that had tried to break her, with Bram still staring at them in horror and Gareth demanding answers like he had any right to them, Rowan realized she didn't want to hide anymore. She met Aldrich's gaze and nodded once. His answering smile was barely there, just a slight curve at the corner of his mouth, but it made her heart skip nonetheless. Then he reached up with his free hand and unfastened the clasp of his fur mantle, letting it slide from his shoulders. Beneath it, his armor gleamed, black metal etched with symbols so old even the scholars in the capital couldn't fully translate them. But it was his wrist that drew every eye. There, wrapped around his left wrist, was a band of light. Not metal. Not ink. Light, pure and silver and pulsing with a rhythm that matched a heartbeat. A mating bond. Visible. Undeniable. The crowd gasped. Rowan took a breath, then slowly unwrapped the leather bands from her own wrist. The light beneath blazed to life, identical to Aldrich's, silver and steady, proof of an oath spoken under a blood moon in a forest that didn't exist on any map. The two marks seemed to sing when revealed together, a harmony that made the air hum and the wolves howl and several villagers stumble backward in shock. Gareth's walking stick clattered to the ground. His voice came out strangled. "That's a royal bond. That's a fated bond," Aldrich finished calmly. "Sworn under the Moonstone Forest's witness. Blessed by the goddess herself." His gaze swept over the crowd, and though his voice remained even, there was no mistaking the steel beneath it. "My wife is Rowan of Briar's Hollow. And I am Aldrich, Alpha King of the 9 Realms." The words fell like stones into water. Someone screamed. Several people dropped to their knees. Bram made a sound like a wounded animal and collapsed onto the cobblestones, trembling. And Rowan, who had spent years believing she was too soft, too small, too nothing to matter, stood beside the most powerful ruler alive and realized something that made her want to laugh and cry all at once. She had never needed their approval. She had only ever needed to approve of herself. Maren was the first to recover. She stepped forward, still wide-eyed but smiling, and dropped into a surprisingly graceful curtsy. "Your Majesty." And Queen Rowan. She tested the title like a foreign word, then grinned. "Goddess above, Rowan. You've been holding out on us." Despite everything, Rowan laughed, a real, startled sound. "I didn't mean to. It's complicated." "Complicated," Maren repeated dryly. You married the Alpha King and thought it was complicated. In my defense, Rowan said, her lips twitching, he didn't exactly come with a warning label. Aldrich's hand tightened around hers, and when she glanced up at him, she found him looking down at her with an expression so warm, so openly fond, it made her breath catch. I believe, he murmured, low enough that only she could hear, the Moonstone Forest was the warning label. She bit back a smile. Fair point. Around them, the village was slowly coming back to life, people whispering, pointing, some still on their knees, others backing away as if proximity to royalty might burn them. Gareth had picked up his walking stick and was staring at them both with an expression caught somewhere between awe and abject terror. But Bram was still on the ground, shaking, his earlier cruelty stripped away to reveal the small, petty man beneath. Rowan looked at him and felt nothing. No anger. No vindication. Just a quiet, settled sense of closure. She had left this place broken. She had returned whole. And that was victory enough. We should go, Aldrich said quietly, his gaze tracking the way some of the villagers were beginning to edge closer, curiosity overcoming fear. Your mother will want to meet you, Rowan finished, a knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. She doesn't know about any of this. Then it's time she did. He said it so simply, as if meeting his wife's mother in a tiny village cottage while wearing a crown and armor wasn't potentially the most awkward situation imaginable. But before they could move, a voice rang out from the crowd. Wait. A young woman pushed forward, Isla, Bram's wife. Her face was flushed, her hands clenched in her skirts, but her eyes were bright with something that looked like determination. She stopped a few paces away and dropped into a curtsy that wobbled only slightly. Your Majesties. She swallowed hard, then lifted her chin. I wanted to apologize. For my husband's words. They were cruel and undeserved, and I'm ashamed I didn't speak against them sooner. Rowan blinked, surprised. Isla wasn't looking at Aldrich. She was looking at Rowan, her gaze steady despite the tremor in her voice. You deserved better than how this village treated you, Isla continued. Better than how he treated you. And I'm sorry. For a moment, Rowan didn't know what to say. Then she stepped forward, ignoring Aldrich's protective instinct to keep her close, and offered Isla a small, genuine smile. Thank you, Rowan said softly. That means more than you know. Isla's shoulders sagged with relief, and she smiled back, tentative but real. And in that moment, Rowan felt something shift. Not in the village, but in herself. The last bitter thread of resentment she'd been carrying finally unraveled, leaving only peace in its wake. She turned back to Aldrich, who was watching her with an expression that made her heart flutter. Ready? She asked. He smiled, a real one this time, not the careful mask of a king, but the warm, honest expression of the man who'd collapsed at her feet in a magic forest and let her see him at his weakest. With you, he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. Always. And as they walked together through the parting crowd, hand in hand, Rowan realized something. Leaving Briar's Hollow had taught her how to survive. But loving Aldrich and letting him love her in return had taught her how to rise. The walk to Rowan's mother's cottage felt both too long and too short. Aldrich had dismissed the royal guard that must have been waiting just beyond the village border. Rowan had caught the subtle hand signal he'd made, the way shadows seemed to melt back into the forest. He walked beside her now like any husband might, his armor somehow less imposing in the golden afternoon light, though people still scattered from their path like startled birds. You're enjoying this, Rowan murmured as an old man nearly fell off his porch trying to bow. Aldrich's mouth twitched. Enjoying what? Terrifying my entire village. I'm not trying to terrify them. He paused. Is it working? She elbowed him gently, and his quiet laugh rumbled through his chest, a sound she'd heard so rarely in their stolen moments together that it still made warmth bloom behind her ribs. The cottage appeared around the bend, small and weathered, with a garden that had seen better days. Rowan's steps slowed as anxiety crept up her spine. Her mother had always been practical, grounded, the kind of woman who believed in what she could touch and see. How was Rowan supposed to explain that she'd married a king in a forest that didn't exist, bound by magic older than memory itself? Aldrich's hand found hers, squeezing gently. Breathe. Easy for you to say. Your mother probably expected you to marry someone important. My mother, Aldrich said dryly, expected me to marry a duchess with impeccable bloodlines and political connections. Instead, I married a woman who told me fear was a luxury and then proceeded to outsmart an enchanted forest. His thumb brushed over her knuckles. I believe I chose better. Rowan's throat tightened. Before she could respond, the cottage door swung open. Her mother stood framed in the doorway, wrapped in a faded shawl, her face still pale from illness, but her eyes sharp as ever. Those eyes swept over Rowan, then moved to Aldrich and widened. Rowan. Her mother's voice was steady, but Rowan caught the tremor beneath it. You didn't mention you were bringing company. Mother. Rowan stepped forward, pulling Aldrich with her. This is Aldrich. My husband. The words felt strange on her tongue, even now. Foreign and familiar all at once. Her mother's gaze moved between them, taking in their joined hands, the matching bands of light on their wrists that neither had bothered to cover again, Aldrich's armor and crown, and the way he stood like gravity itself bent around him. Then she did something Rowan didn't expect. She laughed. It was a soft sound, almost wondering. Oh, Rowan. What have you done? Rowan faltered. I can explain. You married the Alpha King. Her mother's eyes were bright, though whether with tears or amusement, Rowan couldn't tell. The most powerful ruler in the 9 realms. The man whose name makes grown warriors weep. She shook her head slowly. And you thought I'd be upset? Rowan blinked. I thought you'd think I was mad. I think, her mother said, stepping forward and cupping Rowan's face with hands that trembled slightly, you are the bravest person I've ever known. And I think, her gaze shifted to Aldrich, sharpening. I think you, Your Majesty, had better come inside and tell me exactly how you convinced my daughter to marry you. Aldrich's expression didn't change, but Rowan caught the flash of surprise in his eyes. He'd expected fear, suspicion, maybe even hostility. Not this. With respect, madam, he said carefully, it was your daughter who convinced me. Her mother's laugh was stronger this time. Then you're smarter than you look. She stepped back, gesturing them inside. Come. The tea's gone cold, but I imagine you've both had stranger problems today. The cottage was exactly as Rowan remembered, small, cluttered with dried herbs hanging from the rafters, smelling of wood smoke and lavender. Aldrich had to duck beneath the doorframe, and when he straightened, the crown on his head nearly brushed the ceiling beams. He noticed immediately and, without ceremony, removed the crown and set it on the table like it was nothing more than a hat. Her mother stared at it for a long moment. That's worth more than this entire village, isn't it? Probably, Aldrich admitted. But it's a nuisance indoors. Despite everything, Rowan found herself smiling. They sat at the worn wooden table while her mother busied herself making fresh tea, moving with the careful precision of someone still recovering their strength. Rowan started to rise to help, but her mother waved her off. Sit. I'm not an invalid. She set 3 chipped cups on the table and poured steaming liquid into each. Now, tell me everything. So they did. Rowan started, explaining how she'd wandered after leaving Briar's Hollow, searching for something she couldn't name. How she'd stumbled into the Moonstone Forest on a night when the veil between worlds had grown thin. Aldrich picked up the thread when she faltered, his deep voice filling the small cottage as he described the forest's trials, the way Rowan had solved puzzles that had stumped him. The moment they'd stood before the ancient altar and felt the magic settle around them like a claim. The forest wanted a bond, Aldrich said quietly, his gaze distant with memory. It wouldn't let us leave until we swore the oath. But we didn't have to mean it, Rowan added, her fingers tightening around her cup. The magic would have accepted empty words. Her mother's eyes moved between them. But you meant them. It wasn't a question. Rowan met Aldrich's gaze across the table and felt her breath catch at what she saw there, warmth and certainty, and something fierce enough to remake worlds. Yes, she whispered. We meant them. Her mother was quiet for a long moment, sipping her tea, her expression unreadable. Then she set down her cup and reached across the table to cover Rowan's hand with her own. "I worried about you," she said softly. "When you left. You were so quiet, so hurt by what Bram did, by how this village treated you. I worried you'd lose yourself trying to become what others wanted." Her grip tightened. "But you didn't. You found yourself instead. And then you found him." She glanced at Aldrich. "Or he found you." "Both," Aldrich said. "We found each other." The simple honesty in his voice made something in Rowan's chest ache sweetly. Her mother nodded slowly, then straightened in her chair, and suddenly Rowan recognized the woman who'd once stared down the village elders when they'd tried to take Rowan's inheritance after her father died. "So," her mother said, her tone shifting to something brisk and practical. "What happens now? You can't exactly hide this anymore." She gestured vaguely at the window, where Rowan could see shadows moving, villagers gathering outside, whispering, staring at the cottage like it might transform into a palace at any moment. Rowan's stomach sank. She'd been so focused on the confrontation with Bram, on introducing Aldrich to her mother, that she hadn't thought about the after. But Aldrich had. "Rowan will be formally presented as queen," he said calmly. "There will be a ceremony at the capital, witnessed by representatives from all 9 realms. She'll be given a crown, a title, and all the protections that come with both." His gaze moved to Rowan, softening. "She'll also be given a choice." Rowan frowned. "What choice?" "Whether to remain in the capital or travel freely as she wishes. Whether to take on royal duties or pursue her own path. Whether," he paused, and something vulnerable flickered across his face. "Whether to stay with me at all." The cottage went very, very quiet. "Aldrich," Rowan breathed. "What are you talking about?" "The bond is real," he said, each word careful, measured. "But that doesn't mean you're trapped. If you want your freedom, if you want." She kissed him, leaned across the table, nearly knocking over her teacup, and kissed him with all the certainty she'd been carrying in her chest since the moment he'd stepped between her and Bram. When she pulled back, his eyes were wide, his usual composure shattered. "I choose you," she said fiercely. "I chose you in the forest, and I choose you now, and I'll choose you tomorrow and every day after that. Don't you dare think otherwise." Aldrich stared at her like she'd just performed a miracle. Then his hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with a tenderness that made her heart stutter. "You," he murmured, so softly only she could hear, "are going to be the death of me. Good thing you're hard to kill then." His laugh was quiet, stunned, and absolutely hers. A polite cough reminded them both that they weren't alone. Rowan jerked back, her face burning, to find her mother watching them with an expression of profound satisfaction. "Well," her mother said mildly, sipping her tea. "At least I know you didn't marry him for political advantage." Rowan groaned and buried her face in her hands. Aldrich, to his credit, looked equally embarrassed, which Rowan privately thought was adorable, considering he commanded armies and made grown warriors weep. Before anyone could say anything else, a sharp knock echoed through the cottage. All 3 of them turned toward the door. "Enter," Aldrich called, his voice shifting instantly from gentle to commanding. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside, tall, wrapped in dark leather armor, with silver hair pulled back in a warrior's braid. Her eyes were the color of winter ice, sharp and assessing, and when she saw Aldrich, she dropped to one knee so fast it rattled the floorboards. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion." Her voice was crisp, professional. "But we have a situation." Aldrich's expression hardened. "What kind of situation?" "The kind involving an uninvited delegation from the Eastern Reach." The woman's gaze flicked to Rowan, lingered on the bond mark at her wrist, then returned to Aldrich. "They arrived at the border 2 hours ago, demanding an audience. Their commander insists it's urgent." "It always is with the East," Aldrich muttered. Then he stood, reaching for his crown. "How many?" 20 soldiers. 1 diplomat." The woman hesitated. "The diplomat is Lord Theron." Rowan felt Aldrich go very still beside her. "Who's Lord Theron?" she asked quietly. Aldrich's jaw tightened. "A problem." The woman, clearly one of Aldrich's guards, rose smoothly to her feet. "We've established a perimeter around the village. They won't get within a mile of Her Majesty without your command. Her Majesty. The title sent a strange thrill through Rowan, followed immediately by cold dread. Because if Aldrich's guards were here, establishing perimeters and talking about threats, this was real. All of it was terrifyingly, wonderfully, irreversibly real. Aldrich turned to her, and his expression gentled. I need to deal with this. I'm coming with you. Rowan. If I'm going to be queen, she said firmly, standing to face him, then I'm not going to hide every time there's trouble. Pride flashed in his eyes, followed by concern. Lord Theron is dangerous. He'll try to exploit any weakness he can find. Then he'll be disappointed. Rowan lifted her chin. Because I'm not weak anymore. Behind them, her mother set down her teacup with a definitive clink. She's not. She never was. You'd do well to remember that, Your Majesty. Aldrich looked between Rowan and her mother, and despite the tension in his shoulders, the corner of his mouth twitched. It appears, he murmured, I'm outnumbered. Get used to it, Rowan said. He laughed, quiet and wondering, then turned to his guard. Tell Lord Theron I'll meet him at the village square. And tell him, his hand found Rowan's, fingers interlacing with hers. Tell him the queen will be joining me. The guard's expression didn't flicker, but Rowan caught the flash of approval in her eyes before she bowed and slipped back out the door. When they were alone again, Rowan's mother stood and moved to a small chest in the corner of the cottage. She pulled out a length of fabric, deep blue, embroidered with silver thread, carefully preserved despite its age. This was your grandmother's, she said, draping it over Rowan's shoulders like a cloak. She wore it when she stood before the village council and demanded they give women the right to own property. They tried to dismiss her. She made them listen. Her hands smoothed the fabric gently. I think she'd want you to have it now. Rowan's throat tightened. Mother, you're going to face powerful people who'll try to make you small again. Her mother's eyes were fierce. Don't let them. You're a queen now, Rowan. Act like it. And standing there, wrapped in her grandmother's cloak, her mother's fierce love warming her from the inside out, Aldrich's hand solid and sure in hers. Rowan finally believed it. The village square had transformed in the hour since Aldrich's arrival. Where before there had been dancers and laughter and the warm chaos of harvest festivities, now there was tension thick enough to choke on. Villagers lined the edges of the cobblestones, pressed back against buildings, their eyes wide and nervous. Aldrich's guards had materialized from seemingly nowhere, silent figures in dark armor positioned at every corner, their hands resting on sword hilts. And in the center of it all stood a man who made Rowan's skin crawl on instinct. Lord Theron was beautiful in the way poisonous things often are, tall and lean, with platinum hair that fell in a perfect curtain to his shoulders and eyes the color of frost. He wore Eastern finery, all flowing silk and intricate embroidery, and he smiled like he knew secrets that could ruin kingdoms. 20 soldiers stood behind him in formation, their armor bearing the sigil of the Eastern Reach, a serpent coiled around a crescent moon. When Aldrich and Rowan emerged from the cottage path, that smile widened. Aldrich. Theron's voice carried across the square, warm and pleasant and utterly false. It's been too long, old friend. We were never friends, Aldrich said flatly, not breaking stride. And you know better than to cross my borders without permission. But I bring urgent news. Theron's gaze slid to Rowan, and she felt it like ice water down her spine. News that concerns your companion. Aldrich's hand tightened fractionally around hers. My wife, he corrected, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Queen Rowan. You'll address her with proper respect or you'll find yourself missing the tongue required to address anyone at all. Several villagers gasped. Theron's smile never faltered. My sincerest apologies, Your Majesty. He swept into a bow that was technically correct, but somehow still felt mocking. I had no idea the great Alpha King had finally taken a mate. Congratulations are in order, I'm sure. State your business, Aldrich said. Then leave. So direct. I've always admired that about you. Theron straightened, his expression shifting to something more serious, though Rowan didn't trust it for a moment. I come bearing a message from the Eastern Council. They've heard rumors about a fated bond, about a queen chosen by the moonstone forest itself. His eyes locked on the silver light at Rowan's wrist. They want proof. They want nothing, Aldrich said coldly. The Eastern Council has no claim on my mate, my marriage, or my throne. Of course not. Theron spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. But you must understand their concern. A bond formed in the Moonstone Forest, such power hasn't been seen in generations. Some might worry about what it means for the balance of the realms. Some might worry, Aldrich repeated, each word sharp as glass, that I'll use my mate's power to expand my territory. Is that what you're suggesting? I'm suggesting nothing. Merely conveying concerns. Rowan had been silent until now, watching, listening, trying to understand the game being played. But something in Theron's tone, the way he kept saying mate instead of wife, the way he looked at her like she was an object to be examined, made anger spark hot in her chest. Lord Theron, she said, her voice carrying clear and steady across the square. His attention snapped to her, and she saw surprise flicker across his face, as if he hadn't expected her to speak. Yes, Your Majesty. You say the Eastern Council is concerned about power. She took a step forward, pulling Aldrich with her. What power exactly are they afraid of? Theron's smile returned, sharp as a blade. The Moonstone Forest bonds only those it deems worthy. Those chosen by it are said to possess gifts, healing, prophecy, the ability to command nature itself. His gaze raked over her. Tell me, have you discovered your gift yet? Rowan's heart skipped. She had no idea what he was talking about. The forest had tested them, found them, but there'd been no mention of gifts or powers beyond the bond itself. But she wasn't about to admit that to this man. My gifts, she said carefully, are my own business. Not the Eastern Council's. Spoken like a true queen, Theron murmured. Then his expression hardened. But the Council disagrees. They believe power of that magnitude should be documented, understood, perhaps even regulated. Regulated. Aldrich's voice was deadly quiet. You want to regulate my wife? For the safety of all realms. Get out. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. Aldrich's power rolled across the square like thunder before a storm, making the ground tremble and every wolf within 10 miles howl in response. Theron took an involuntary step back, his composure finally cracking. You're making a mistake. The mistake, Aldrich said, moving forward with the predatory grace of something born to hunt, is yours. You came to my borders without permission. You questioned my mate's autonomy. You implied threat while claiming diplomacy. He stopped inches from Theron, towering over him. Leave now, before I forget the treaties our fathers signed and remind you why the Eastern Reach bends knee to the 9 realms. For a moment, genuine fear flashed in Theron's eyes. Then he recovered, smoothing his expression back into that poisonous smile. Very well. I'll carry your refusal back to the Council. His gaze slid past Aldrich to Rowan. But know this, Your Majesty, power like yours doesn't stay hidden forever. The realms will demand answers eventually. Then the realms, Rowan said, lifting her chin, can ask me themselves. Not send a serpent to do their questioning. Theron's eyes narrowed. Careful, little queen. You're very new to this game. And you, Rowan shot back, are very old at losing it. Someone in the crowd, Rowan thought it might have been Marin, let out a strangled laugh. Theron's face darkened, but before he could respond, Aldrich moved between them again, a wall of controlled violence. You have 10 minutes to clear my borders, he said softly. After that, my guards have permission to ensure your departure by whatever means necessary. Theron stared at him for a long, tense moment. Then he spun on his heel and stalked toward his soldiers, his silk robe snapping like a banner in the wind. This isn't over, he called over his shoulder. The Eastern Council will not be ignored. They already have been, Aldrich replied calmly. They simply haven't noticed yet. Rowan watched as Theron and his soldiers disappeared down the path leading out of Briar's Hollow, their footsteps fading into the gathering dusk. Only when they were truly gone did she allow herself to breathe. Well, she said quietly. That was terrifying. Aldrich turned to her, his expression immediately softening from kingly to concerned. Are you all right? I think so. She looked up at him. What was he talking about? Gifts from the forest? An old legend. Aldrich's hand came up to brush her cheek. Those bonded by the Moonstone Forest are sometimes blessed with abilities tied to their nature. But it's rare, unpredictable, and he hesitated. Not something you need to worry about right now. Rowan wasn't sure she believed him, but before she could press, a voice called out from the crowd. Your Majesties. Gareth, the village elder, stepped forward, his earlier skepticism replaced by something that looked like desperate respect. If I may, we should celebrate. A royal wedding, a queen from our village. This is unprecedented. We should. No. Aldrich's voice wasn't harsh, but it was final. My wife has just returned to care for her ill mother. She's been confronted by an old lover and a foreign diplomat within hours of arrival. What she needs is rest, not celebration. Gareth deflated. Of course, Your Majesty. Forgive me. But Meryn pushed forward, ignoring protocol entirely, and caught Rowan's hand. He's right, though. Not about celebrating, she shot Gareth an exasperated look. But about what this means. Rowan, you're queen. You could help this village. Fix things that have been broken for years. Rowan's stomach twisted. She'd been so focused on survival, on the bond, on Aldrich, that she hadn't thought about what being queen actually meant. She faltered. I don't know how. You'll learn, Meryn said firmly. You learned how to survive out there. You learned how to win a king's heart. You can learn this too. Meryn's right, Aldrich said quietly, his thumb brushing over Rowan's knuckles. But not tonight. Tonight you rest. Relief flooded through her. Thank you. He smiled, small and private, and just for her. Always. They returned to her mother's cottage as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Aldrich's guards melted back into the shadows, maintaining their perimeter but giving them space. Inside, her mother had prepared a simple meal, and the three of them sat around the worn table like it was the most normal thing in the world, a king, a new queen, and the woman who'd raised her to believe she could be more than Briar's Hollow ever imagined. Later, when her mother had retired to bed and the cottage was quiet except for the crackling fire, Rowan and Aldrich sat together on the small bench by the hearth. You were magnificent today, Aldrich murmured, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. I was terrified. That's what makes it magnificent. His lips brushed her temple. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to act despite it. Rowan was quiet for a moment, listening to his heartbeat, steady and sure beneath her ear. What Theron said about gifts, is it true? Could the forest have given me power? Possibly. Aldrich's hand traced absent patterns on her shoulder. But if it did, it will reveal itself when you're ready. Not before. And if it doesn't? If I'm just me? He pulled back enough to look at her, his golden eyes fierce in the firelight. Then you're still everything I need. Everything I chose. Everything I love. The last word hung between them, fragile and enormous all at once. They'd spoken vows. They'd bound themselves with magic older than memory. But this was different. This was a choice made in firelight and quiet, with no forest watching, no crowd bearing witness. Just them. I love you too, Rowan whispered. His smile was sunrise breaking through storm clouds. When he kissed her this time, it was slow and sweet and full of promises, not the stolen kisses in hidden groves or the desperate reunions in moonlit clearings, but something deeper. Something that tasted like home. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Aldrich rested his forehead against hers. I should let you rest, he murmured, though he made no move to leave. You should, Rowan agreed, not moving either. They sat there in comfortable silence, wrapped in each other and the warmth of the fire, until sleep finally claimed them both. Outside, wolves howled at the rising moon. And far to the east, in a castle built of black stone and darker ambitions, Lord Theron delivered his report to a council that listened with keen interest and sharper plans. The game, after all, had only just begun. Rowan woke to sunlight streaming through the cottage window and the smell of fresh bread baking. For a moment, she forgot where she was, forgot the crown and the bond and the diplomat with frost-colored eyes. She was just a girl in her childhood home, warm and safe beneath worn quilts. Then she felt the weight of an arm draped across her waist and remembered everything. Aldrich was still asleep beside her on the narrow bed, his face peaceful in a way she rarely saw during waking hours. Without the crown and armor, without the weight of kingship pressing down on his shoulders, he looked younger. Almost vulnerable. She studied him in the morning light, the scar along his jaw from some long-ago battle, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the steady rise and fall of his chest. This man who commanded armies and made diplomats tremble had chosen her, had collapsed at her feet in a magic forest and let her see him at his weakest. And she loved him so fiercely it frightened her. "You're staring," Aldrich murmured without opening his eyes, a smile tugging at his lips. "I'm memorizing," Rowan corrected softly. His eyes opened, molten gold in the dawn light. "Why?" "Because moments like this are rare." She reached up to trace the scar on his jaw. "And I want to remember what you look like when you're just you." Something tender and raw crossed his face. He caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. "I'm always just me with you. That's the point." Before she could respond, a knock sounded at the door. "Your Majesties?" The voice was female, crisp, the same guard from yesterday. "Forgive the intrusion, but we have a situation that requires attention." Aldrich sighed, closing his eyes briefly. "Of course we do. Does being king ever get easier?" Rowan asked as they reluctantly untangled themselves. "No." He stood, reaching for his armor. "But having you makes it bearable." The guard, who introduced herself as Captain Lyra, was waiting in the main room with Rowan's mother, who was calmly serving her tea like hosting royal guards was an everyday occurrence. "Report," Aldrich said, fastening the last buckle on his armor. Lyra set down her cup. 3 developments overnight. First, Lord Theron and his delegation have not crossed the border. They've made camp just outside your territory. Aldrich's expression darkened. "That's not a situation. That's a provocation." Second, Lyra continued, "We've received word from the capital. The Council of 9 is requesting your immediate return. They've heard about the Queen and want a formal presentation." "They can wait," Aldrich said flatly. And third, Lyra hesitated, her gaze shifting to Rowan. "The villagers are gathering outside. They want to speak with Queen Rowan." Rowan's stomach dropped. "About what?" "Everything, apparently." Lyra's expression was carefully neutral. "Petitions, requests, complaints they've been holding for years. Word has spread that their own has become queen, and they believe you'll listen where others wouldn't." Rowan looked at Aldrich, panic rising in her throat. I'm not ready for this. I don't know how to breathe." He was there immediately, hands on her shoulders, steady and sure. "You don't have to do this alone." "But I don't know what I'm doing." "Neither did I when I became king." His thumb brushed her cheek. "I learned. So will you." Her mother set down her own teacup with a definitive clink. "And you'll start by listening. That's all they want, Rowan. Someone who sees them." "Your mother is right," Aldrich said. "You don't need to solve everything today. Just hear them." Rowan took a shaky breath, then nodded. "All right. I'll try." "You'll do more than try," her mother said firmly, rising to fetch Rowan's grandmother's cloak from where it had been carefully folded. She draped it over Rowan's shoulders again. "You'll remind them why they should have valued you in the first place." The crowd outside was larger than Rowan expected. Easily 50 people, maybe more, gathered in an anxious cluster beyond the cottage gate. They fell silent when she emerged, Aldrich at her side, Lyra and 2 other guards forming a protective semicircle behind them. For a moment, no one spoke. Then an old woman stepped forward, Mistress Hale, who ran the village's only textile shop. Her hands were gnarled with age and work, her back bent, but her eyes were sharp. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice carrying across the yard. "We mean no disrespect. But we need help, and we're hoping," she swallowed hard. "We're hoping you remember what it was like to be one of us." Rowan's throat tightened. "I do. I remember." "Then you remember the tax collectors," another voice called out, a younger man, a farmer Rowan vaguely recognized. "They come twice a year and take half our harvest. We barely have enough to survive winter, let alone thrive." "And the bridge," someone else added. "It's been broken for 3 years." We keep petitioning for repairs, but no one listens. The healer's gone, an elderly man said. Move to the city for better pay. Now when someone gets sick, his voice broke. We lose them. More voices joined in, a cascade of grievances, the well that kept running dry, the road that flooded every spring, the lack of protection from bandits, the school that had closed for want of funding. Rowan listened to it all, her heart growing heavier with each word. These weren't grand political problems. These were the small, grinding hardships that wore people down day by day, year by year, the kind of suffering that went unnoticed by those in power because it was too common, too ordinary, too small to matter. But it mattered to the people living it. When the voices finally quieted, Rowan took a breath and stepped forward. I hear you, she said clearly. And I promise you this, I will not forget where I came from. I will not forget what it's like to feel unseen. She looked at each face in turn. But I'm also new to this. I don't know all the laws or the systems or how to fix everything overnight. So I'm going to need your help. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. My help? Mistress Hale asked. How can we help you? You're the queen. Exactly, Rowan said. I'm queen, but I grew up here. I know this village. And if I'm going to help, I need to understand which problems are most urgent. I need to know what solutions you've already tried. I need, she paused, an idea taking shape. I need a counsel. Aldrich, who'd been silent until now, made a soft sound of approval. A council? The farmer repeated. Representatives from different parts of the village, Rowan explained, her confidence growing as she spoke. People who can tell me what's really happening here, not what officials think is happening. We'll meet regularly. You'll advise me, and I'll use whatever influence I have to help. You'd listen to us? Mistress Hale's voice trembled. Truly? I'm listening right now, Rowan said gently. Why would I stop? The old woman's eyes filled with tears. She pressed a hand to her mouth, nodding wordlessly. Around her, others were nodding too, slowly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. We could do that, the farmer said. We could help organize it. I'll volunteer, someone called out. Me too. And me. Rowan felt something warm bloom in her chest, not the magical heat of the bond, but something simpler. Hope. She glanced at Aldrich, who was watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. Pride and love and something that looked almost like wonder. There's one more thing, Rowan said, raising her voice to be heard over the excited chatter. The tax collectors, when do they come next? 3 weeks, Mistress Hale said. Right after harvest. Rowan turned to Aldrich. Can you? I'll send word to the capital today, he said before she could finish. Briar's Hollow's taxes will be suspended for 2 years while infrastructure is repaired. And I'll assign a royal engineer to assess the bridge and wells. The crowd erupted into stunned silence, then jubilant shouts. Rowan stared at him. You can just do that? I'm the king, he said with a small smile. It has occasional advantages. Thank you. I don't know what to. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. You already thanked me. By being exactly who you are. Her face heated, but before she could respond, the crowd surged forward, not threatening, but celebratory. People were crying, laughing, reaching out to touch her cloak as if she were some kind of blessing made flesh. Marin pushed through to pull Rowan into a fierce hug. You're going to be an amazing queen, she whispered. I always knew you were meant for more than this village could give you. I think, Rowan whispered back, her eyes stinging. The village gave me more than it realized. When they finally extracted themselves from the grateful crowd, the sun was high overhead and Rowan's voice was hoarse from talking. Lyra approached with a sympathetic expression. Your Majesty, we really should discuss this situation with Lord Theron. Rowan's brief happiness dimmed. Right. He's still camped at the border. Making a spectacle of himself, Lyra confirmed. He sent 3 more messages requesting an audience. Each one more insistent than the last. Aldrich's expression hardened. He's waiting for us to make a mistake. Give him an excuse to report back to the Eastern Council that we're unstable or hostile. So what do? Rowan asked. We give him exactly what he wants, Aldrich said slowly. An audience. On our terms. That sounds dangerous. It is. He met her gaze. Which is why you're going to stay here while I deal with him. Absolutely not. Aldrich sighed. Rowan, you said I was queen. That means I don't hide when things get difficult. She crossed her arms. Besides, Theron came here because of me. Because of the bond. If I'm the reason, I should be part of the solution. She's right, Lyra said quietly. Strategically speaking, if Queen Rowan appears strong and confident, it undermines any narrative that she's vulnerable or uncertain. Aldrich looked between them, then closed his eyes briefly in defeat. I'm going to regret this. Probably, Rowan agreed. But you're stuck with me anyway. His laugh was reluctant but genuine. Yes. Yes, I am. They spent the next hour preparing, Lyra briefing them on Eastern diplomatic customs, Aldrich teaching Rowan the subtle art of royal intimidation. It's mostly in the posture, he assured her. And her mother insisting she wear a circlet made of woven silver that had been in their family for generations. It's not a crown, her mother said, settling it on Rowan's head. But it's yours. Your history. Don't forget that when you're standing before men who think power only comes from thrones. Rowan studied her reflection in the small mirror, the circlet gleaming against her dark hair, her grandmother's cloak draped over her shoulders, the bond mark visible and bright at her wrist. She looked like a queen. She felt like a girl playing dress-up. What if I fail? She whispered to Aldrich as they prepared to leave. What if I say the wrong thing, or Theron sees right through me, or... Then we fail together, Aldrich said simply. He took her hand, squeezing gently. But Rowan, you won't fail. You've already proven yourself to the forest, to me, to your village. Theron is just one more test. And you've passed every other one spectacularly. She wanted to believe him. She had to believe him. Because in an hour, she would stand before a man who wanted to see her break, and she would have to prove to him, to the Eastern Council, to herself, that she was unbreakable. What would you do if someone challenged everything you'd just become? Would you hide and protect yourself, or step forward and prove them wrong? The Eastern camp was exactly as arrogant as its lord. Silk pavilions in shades of silver and blue rose from the meadow just beyond Briar's Hollow's border, their pennants snapping in the wind. Guards in polished armor stood at attention, and servants moved between tents with the practiced efficiency of a military operation disguised as luxury. Theron waited in the largest pavilion, seated on what could only be described as a portable throne cushioned, ornate, deliberately positioned to force visitors to look up at him. Rowan felt Aldrich tense beside her as they approached. Breathe, she murmured, echoing his earlier advice. Don't let him bait you. He's sitting on a throne, Aldrich muttered. In my territory. That's not bait. That's a declaration. Then we'll make a bigger one. Before Aldrich could ask what she meant, Rowan stepped through the pavilion entrance, not cautiously, but with the kind of confidence she'd learned from watching him command rooms simply by entering them. Theron's eyebrows rose in surprise. Clearly, he'd expected her to follow Aldrich, to let him lead. But Rowan was done following scripts written by men who underestimated her. Lord Theron, she said, her voice carrying through the pavilion. How kind of you to wait for us. Though I'm surprised you needed such elaborate accommodations for what should have been a brief conversation. Behind her, she heard Lyra make a sound that might have been a stifled laugh. Theron's smile sharpened. Your Majesty. How delightful to see you again. And, looking so, his gaze swept over her circlet and cloak. Charmingly rustic. Rustic, Rowan repeated, moving further into the pavilion with Aldrich at her side. Is that Eastern speak for authentic? I suppose when you're used to silk and pretense, genuine tradition must seem quaint. Theron's smile froze. Score one for the village girl, Rowan thought with grim satisfaction. Please sit. Theron gestured to cushions arranged before his throne lower, forcing them to look up at him. We'll stand, Aldrich said flatly. This won't take long. But it might. Theron leaned back, the picture of ease. You see, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. About the concerns the Eastern Council raised regarding Queen Rowan's unique position. You mean their groundless paranoia about power they don't possess and can't control, Aldrich said. Power they don't understand, Theron corrected smoothly. The Moonstone Forest hasn't chosen a bonded pair in over a century. The last time it did, the realm nearly tore itself apart fighting over the gifts that bond produced. Rowan felt cold wash over her. What happened? War. Theron's eyes glittered. The bonded pair possessed abilities that made kingdoms tremble. Healing that could resurrect the dying. Prophecy that could predict harvests, battles, catastrophes. Nature bending that could end droughts or summon storms. He paused. Naturally, everyone wanted to control them. To use them. And when the pair refused, he spread his hands. Blood was spilled. Alliances shattered. The 9 realms nearly became the Shattered Realms. Ancient history, Aldrich said dismissively. And irrelevant to us. Is it? Theron leaned forward. Tell me, Your Majesty, his gaze locked on Rowan. Have you experienced anything unusual since the bonding? Dreams that feel too real? Moments where you know things you shouldn't? Times when plants grow faster in your presence or animals respond to your emotions. Rowan's mind raced. There had been small things, the roses outside her mother's cottage blooming overnight, the way wounded animals seemed drawn to her during her travels, dreams that felt less like sleep and more like visions. But she dismissed them as coincidence, stress, imagination. Now she wondered. But Theron was watching her too carefully, searching for any sign of weakness or confirmation. I've experienced being married to a man I love, she said evenly. Everything else is none of your concern. But it is. Because if you do possess such gifts, the Eastern Council will demand assurances that they won't be weaponized against us. Weaponized, Aldrich repeated, his voice dropping to something deadly. You think I would use my wife as a weapon? I think power corrupts, Theron said. And absolute power, the kind your bond could grant, corrupts absolutely. Then it's fortunate, Rowan cut in before Aldrich could explode, that I have no interest in power. Eastern or otherwise. Noble sentiment. Theron's smile was patronizing. But naive. Power isn't always something you seek. Sometimes it seeks you. And when it does, he stood smoothly from his throne, descending the shallow steps to stand eye level with them. You'll have to choose. Use it, or watch others fight to take it from you. Is that a threat? Aldrich's hand moved to his sword hilt. A warning. Theron's gaze shifted between them. The Eastern Council isn't your only concern. Word of your bond is spreading. By now, every realm knows the Alpha King has found his fated mate. They'll come, diplomats, assassins, priests, scholars, all wanting something from her. From you both. Let them come, Aldrich said coldly. They'll regret it. Will they? You're powerful, Aldrich. Perhaps the most powerful alpha alive. But even you can't fight all 8 realms if they unite against a common threat. We're not a threat, Rowan said, frustration bleeding into her voice. We're just 2 people who've found each other. Why can't that be enough? Something flickered in Theron's expression, almost like pity. Because in our world, Your Majesty, nothing is ever just personal. Everything is political. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Rowan wanted to scream. She'd spent years feeling invisible, unwanted, too small to matter. Now she was being told she mattered too much, that her very existence was a political problem to be solved. But beneath the frustration, another emotion was building: anger. She'd earned this bond. She'd walked through a forest that tested every fear and insecurity she had. She'd proven herself worthy not to kingdoms or councils, but to the magic itself. And now some diplomat in silk robes wanted to treat her like a problem? No, not anymore. Lord Theron, she said, her voice quiet, but carrying an edge she hadn't known she possessed. I understand your council's concerns. Truly. But here's what you're going to tell them when you return. She stepped forward, close enough that he had to look at her, really look at her. Tell them I am not a weapon. I am not a tool. I am not a threat to be managed or a resource to be controlled. I am a woman who walked through a magic forest, earned a bond through trials they can't imagine, and married a king who sees me as an equal. Her hand moved to her wrist, to the silver light pulsing there. If the forest gave me gifts, they are mine to wield or not wield as I choose. Not the Eastern Councils. Not any councils. Mine. She could feel Aldrich beside her, radiating pride and something fierce. And if your council, if any realm, tries to force my hand, tries to regulate or control or threaten me. She let her words hang in the air. They'll learn exactly why the Moonstone Forest chooses so carefully. Because it doesn't bond the weak. It bonds those strong enough to protect what matters. Theron stared at her, his practiced composure finally showing cracks. You don't know what you're dealing with. Neither do you, Rowan interrupted. You're so focused on what I might become that you haven't considered what I already am. A queen. Aldrich's mate. And someone who will not be intimidated by threats dressed up as warnings. She turned to Aldrich. We're done here. He nodded, his eyes blazing with approval. We are. They turned as one and walked toward the pavilion exit. This isn't over. Theron called after them, his composure finally shattering. The council won't accept. Then they'll learn to, Aldrich said without turning around. One way or another. As they emerged into daylight, Rowan felt her legs trembling with adrenaline. She'd just threatened an entire realm's council. She'd stood up to a diplomat who'd been playing political games since before she was born. She'd been terrified. But she'd done it anyway. That, Lyra said as they walked back toward the village, was the most impressive display of royal authority I've witnessed in 10 years of service. I think I'm going to be sick, Rowan admitted. Aldrich's arm came around her waist, steadying her. You were perfect. I was reckless. You were magnificent. He pressed a kiss to her temple. And you're right. The gifts, if they exist, are yours. No one else's. But what if Theron's right? Rowan looked up at him. What if realms do come after us? After me? Then we face them. His expression was fierce, unyielding. Together. The way we've faced everything else. Rowan wanted to believe him. But as they crossed back into Briar's Hollow, she couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just declared war on forces they didn't fully understand. Behind them, in the eastern pavilion, Theron watched them disappear into the village. Then he smiled. Not the poisonous smile from before, but something colder. More calculating. Magnificent indeed, he murmured to himself. The council will be very interested to hear that the little queen has fire after all. He gestured to a servant. Break camp. We're returning to the east. My lord. The servant hesitated. Should we not wait for? No need. Theron's smile widened. We got exactly what we came for. The servant looked confused, but bowed and hurried away. Theron turned back toward Briar's Hollow, his eyes tracking the direction Rowan and Aldrich had gone. Enjoy your victory, little queen, he whispered. It won't last long. 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Aldrich's royal engineers arrived at dawn on the second day, a team of 4 led by a woman named Kasha, who took one look at the broken bridge and declared it an insult to competent craftsmanship. Within hours, she had plans drawn up, materials requisitioned, and half the village recruited to help with reconstruction. The well was pronounced salvageable with proper reinforcement. The flooded road required drainage channels. The schoolhouse needed a new roof and a teacher willing to relocate from the capital. I'll send word to the university, Aldrich told Rowan as they watched workers shore up the bridge's foundation. There are always young scholars looking for quieter postings. Thank you. Rowan leaned against him, exhausted but content. For all of this. You gave them hope, he said simply. I'm just providing tools. But it was more than tools. It was validation, proof that someone in power actually cared about villages like Briar's Hollow. Proof that Rowan's promises weren't empty. The village council held its first meeting on the 3rd day, gathering in Marin's bakery because the old council hall had a leaking roof. 12 people showed up, farmers, craftspeople, elders, all nervous but determined. Rowan sat at the head of the table, her grandmother's cloak around her shoulders, and listened as they laid out problems, proposed solutions, debated logistics. She didn't pretend to have all the answers. Instead, she asked questions, made notes, promised to research laws and funding sources. You're good at this, Marin whispered during a break while the others argued passionately about crop rotation schedules. I'm terrified, Rowan admitted. That's how you know you're doing it right. Marin squeezed her hand. Leaders who aren't afraid of making mistakes usually make the biggest ones. By evening, they had a plan, not perfect, but workable. Agricultural reforms, trade partnerships with neighboring villages, a proposal to present to Aldrich's Council of Nine for regional development funding. It was a start. More importantly, it was theirs. On the fourth morning, Rowan woke to find Aldrich already dressed, standing at the cottage window with tension radiating from his shoulders. "What's wrong?" she asked, sitting up. "Message from the capital." His jaw was tight. "The Council of Nine is demanding our presence. They've given us 3 days to appear before them, or they'll send a delegation here." Rowan's stomach sank. "They can do that?" "Technically, yes. I'm king, but the council advises me on major decisions. They have the right to request an audience." He turned to face her. "They want to assess you. Determine if our bond poses any threat to the realm's stability. So basically, I'm on trial." Essentially. His expression was grim. "I can refuse. Tell them it's not their business. But that would create a rift I'm not sure we can afford right now, not with the Eastern Council already stirring trouble." Rowan threw off the blankets, her mind racing. "Then we go. We show them I'm not a threat." "Rowan, hiding will only make things worse. If they're going to judge me anyway, I'd rather face them directly." She crossed to him, taking his hands. "Besides, I need to see where you live. Where we'll live. I can't avoid the capital forever." Aldrich looked torn between pride and protectiveness. "The council will try to test you. To see if you have the political acumen to be queen. Then I'll show them." She lifted her chin. "I handled Theron, didn't I?" "You terrified Theron," Aldrich said with a hint of amusement. "Which is why he went running back to report on the formidable new queen." Formidable. Rowan tested the word. "I like that." His laugh was soft, tension easing slightly. "I knew you would." They left Briar's Hollow at midday, surrounded by royal guards and traveling in a carriage that felt absurdly luxurious compared to the worn cart Rowan had arrived in. Her mother stood at the cottage gate, watching them prepare to depart. "You'll come visit?" Rowan called through the carriage window. "Once you're settled." Her mother's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Go show them what a girl from Briar's Hollow can do." The journey to the capital took 2 days. Rowan spent the time asking Aldrich about the council members, their personalities, their politics, their likely reactions to her. He described them with the weary familiarity of someone who'd spent years navigating their egos and ambitions. "Lord Garrett is the oldest, most traditional. He'll question everything about you. Lady Isadora controls the Southern Territories. She's sharp, pragmatic, and doesn't suffer fools. Councillor Thane represents the military. He respects strength above all else." 8 more names, 8 more personalities to memorize and anticipate. By the time the capital's towers appeared on the horizon, Rowan's head was spinning. The city itself was breathtaking, white stone buildings rising in elegant tiers, banners snapping in the wind, streets bustling with people from every corner of the 9 realms. The royal palace sat at the city's heart, all soaring spires and stained glass windows that caught sunlight like jewels. "It's beautiful," Rowan breathed. "It's a gilded cage," Aldrich muttered. "But yes, beautiful." The palace staff were waiting when they arrived, servants bowing, guards saluting, advisors rushing forward with reports and schedules. Aldrich handled it all with practiced efficiency, issuing orders and deflecting questions while steering Rowan through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. Her new quarters were stunning, a suite of rooms with windows overlooking gardens, furniture that looked too expensive to sit on, and more space than her mother's entire cottage. "This is mine," she asked, turning in a slow circle. "Ours," Aldrich corrected, closing the door behind them. "My chambers are through that door." He gestured to a connecting doorway. "But these are for you. Your space. Your sanctuary." Rowan felt something tighten in her chest. Even here, even in a palace, he was making sure she had autonomy. Privacy. Choice. "Thank you," she whispered. He crossed to her, cupping her face gently. "You don't have to thank me for treating you like the queen you are." Before she could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them. "Your Majesty?" Lyra's voice carried through the door. "The council is assembled. They're ready to receive you." Aldrich closed his eyes briefly, then straightened. "It's time." The council chamber was everything Rowan had feared, circular, with 10 ornate chairs arranged in a semicircle facing a central platform where she and Aldrich would stand. 9 of the chairs were occupied by men and women in formal robes, their faces ranging from curious to openly hostile. The 10th chair, the largest, at the circle's center, was Aldrich's. He led her to the platform, his hand firm around hers, and faced the council with the easy authority of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "Counselors," he said, "I present Queen Rowan, my fated mate, bonded under the witness of the Moonstone Forest." Silence. Then Lord Garrett, elderly, silver-haired, his face creased with suspicion, leaned forward. "A village girl, bound in a forest that exists more in legend than reality. You expect us to accept this?" "I expect you to respect it," Aldrich said coldly. "The bond is real. The magic is witnessed. Your acceptance is irrelevant. But our council is not." Lady Isadora's voice was sharp as glass. "You've brought an unknown element into the heart of our realm. We have a right to question her suitability." Suitability. Aldrich's laugh was humorless. "She's my mate, not a political appointment. And yet she'll influence you," Counselor Thane rumbled. "Advise you. Perhaps even rule beside you. We need to know she's capable." "Then ask her," Rowan said, her voice ringing clear through the chamber. Every head turned toward her. Lord Garrett's eyebrows rose. "You presume to speak without being addressed?" "I presume," Rowan said evenly, "that if you want to judge my capabilities, you should judge me directly. Not discuss me like I'm not standing here." A ripple of surprise moved through the council. Lady Isadora's lips twitched, might have been approval. "Very well. Tell us, girl, what makes you think you're qualified to be queen?" "I don't think I'm qualified," Rowan admitted. "Not yet. I'm learning. But I was qualified enough for the Moonstone Forest to choose me. Qualified enough to walk through trials that test not power or birthright, but character." "Character." Lord Garrett scoffed. "And what character does a village girl possess?" "The character to survive being underestimated my entire life." Rowan met his gaze steadily. "To leave everything familiar in search of something better. To see a king collapse at my feet and help him instead of running. To return to a home that hurt me and still try to heal it." She took a breath, feeling Aldrich's pride radiating beside her. "I don't have your experience or your education," she continued. "But I have something you might have forgotten. I know what it's like to be powerless. To need help and be ignored. And I will spend every day as queen making sure others don't feel that way." The chamber was silent. Then Lady Isadora leaned back, a small smile playing at her lips. "Interesting. Passionate," another counselor murmured. "Naive," Lord Garrett countered. But even he sounded less certain. Counselor Thane crossed his arms. "The Eastern Council has expressed concerns about power. About gifts the forest bond might have granted." "What do you say to that?" Rowan hesitated. This was the question she'd been dreading. She could lie. Deny everything. Play safe. Or she could trust in herself, in Aldrich, in the bond that had brought her here. "I don't fully understand what the forest gave me," she said slowly. "But I've noticed small things. Plants responding to my emotions. Animals trusting me instinctively. Dreams that feel like warnings or guidance." Gasps echoed through the chamber. "So the rumors are true," Lord Garrett breathed. "You do possess gifts." "If I do," Rowan said firmly, "they are mine. Not weapons. Not tools for political leverage. Mine to use as I see fit, which will be to help people. To heal. To protect. Not to conquer or control." "Pretty words," Garrett said. "But power corrupts." "Then watch me," Rowan interrupted. "Judge me by my actions, not your fears. Give me a chance to prove that someone can hold power and still choose kindness." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Aldrich spoke, his voice resonant with authority. "My mate has spoken her truth. She has faced her questions with honesty and courage. If any of you still doubt her worthiness, you doubt the Moonstone Forest's judgment, and, by extension, the goddess herself." That landed like a hammer blow. No one wanted to be seen questioning the goddess. Lady Isadora stood gracefully. "I, for one, am satisfied. The queen has shown intelligence, integrity, and strength. I support her formal coronation." One by one, other counselors stood, some reluctant, some genuinely pleased, until only Lord Garrett remained seated. "And you, Garrett?" Aldrich's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Will you oppose the will of this council?" The old man stared at Rowan for a long moment. Then, slowly, he stood. "I will watch," he said. "Closely. But I will not oppose. Not yet." It wasn't quite approval. But it was enough. The coronation was scheduled for 3 days later. 3 days that passed in a whirlwind of preparation, seamstresses taking measurements, etiquette tutors drilling her on formal protocols, advisors briefing her on the political landscape of each realm. Rowan's head spun with information about trade agreements, succession laws, ceremonial customs, and the 100 small ways a queen could accidentally insult someone. "I can't remember all of this," she said on the second evening, surrounded by scrolls and ledgers in her chambers. Aldrich appeared in the connecting doorway, already dressed for bed. "You don't have to remember everything. Just the important parts." "Which parts are important?" "The parts that matter to you." He crossed to where she sat, gently closing the ledger in front of her. "The rest is just noise designed to make you feel inadequate." Rowan looked up at him. "Is that what they did to you? When you became king?" "Every day for the first year." His smile was rueful. "They tested me constantly, waiting for me to fail, to prove I was too young or too inexperienced or too different from my father." "What did you do?" "I stopped trying to be what they expected." He pulled her to her feet, into his arms. "I became what I knew I could be. And eventually, they accepted it." Rowan rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I'm terrified I'll disappoint you." "Impossible." His hand stroked her hair. "You've already exceeded every expectation I had. Do you know what I see when I look at you? A village girl playing dress-up? A woman who walked through fire and came out stronger. Who faced down diplomats and councils and her own past with equal courage. Who makes me want to be a better king because you show me what's possible when we actually care about the people we serve." Rowan's throat tightened. "I love you. And I love you." He tilted her chin up, his golden eyes warm in the lamplight. "Tomorrow, you'll stand before the 9 realms and claim your crown. But Rowan, you're already a queen. The ceremony just makes it official." She kissed him then, pouring every ounce of gratitude and love and fierce determination into it. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Aldrich's expression was soft with wonder. "What was that for?" "For seeing me," Rowan whispered. "When no one else did." The morning of the coronation dawned clear and bright. Rowan stood in her chambers while servants dressed her in layers of silk and velvet, deep midnight blue embroidered with silver thread that caught the light like stars. Her grandmother's cloak was carefully draped over her shoulders, the worn fabric looking somehow regal against the formal gown. The circlet her mother had given her was polished until it gleamed. But it was the dress itself that made her breath catch, because woven into the embroidery were tiny details only she would recognize. Roses from her mother's garden. Oak leaves like the ones Bram had carved their initials into. The constellation pattern that hung above the moonstone forest. "Aldrich designed it," Lyra said quietly, fastening the final clasp. "He wanted you to carry your whole story with you." Rowan blinked back tears. "He did this. Spent hours with the seamstresses, describing every detail." Lyra stepped back, assessing. "You look like a queen, Your Majesty. But more importantly, you look like yourself." The ceremony was held in the Grand Hall, a massive space with vaulted ceilings, stained glass windows depicting the 9 realms, and enough room for hundreds of witnesses. Representatives from every territory filled the benches, dressed in their finest, whispering excitedly as Rowan entered. She walked alone down the center aisle, as tradition demanded. No one to hold her hand or whisper encouragement. Just her, the watching crowd, and the weight of a crown waiting at the end. But Aldrich stood at the altar, resplendent in ceremonial armor, his eyes locked on her with such fierce pride it felt like a physical touch. "You can do this," his gaze seemed to say. "I believe in you." And suddenly, Rowan wasn't walking alone at all. She reached the altar, and the high priestess, an ancient woman with silver hair and eyes like moonlight, stepped forward. In her hands, she carried a crown. Not the heavy, jewel-encrusted thing Rowan had expected. This crown was delicate, made of twisted silver branches set with moonstones that glowed with inner light. It looked alive, almost like it had been grown rather than forged. This crown, the priestess said, her voice carrying through the hall, was made from a branch of the moonstone forest itself. Gifted to us when the forest learned of your bonding. It recognizes you, Rowan of Briar's Hollow. Recognizes your strength, your compassion, your worthiness. Rowan stared at the crown, something stirring in her chest, a warmth that felt like recognition. Like coming home. Kneel, the priestess instructed gently. Rowan knelt, her heart racing. The priestess raised the crown high. By the authority granted through the 9 realms, by the blessing of the Moonstone Forest, by the bond of fate itself, I crown you Rowan, Queen of the 9 realms, keeper of the forest bond, protector of the powerless. The crown settled on her head, and the world shifted. Light exploded through the hall, silver and brilliant, pouring from the crown, from her bond mark, from somewhere deep inside her that had always been there but never acknowledged. The stained glass windows blazed, casting rainbow patterns across the stone floor. Every plant in the hall, decorative flowers, potted trees, even the vines carved into the pillars, burst into bloom simultaneously. Gasps and cries echoed through the crowd. Rowan felt it all, the life force of every living thing in the hall, the pulse of the earth beneath the stones, the wild magic of the forest still thrumming through her veins. It was overwhelming, terrifying, and somehow completely right. The priestess smiled. The forest has spoken. Rise, Queen Rowan. Claim your place. Rowan stood on trembling legs and turned to face the crowd. 1,000 faces stared back at her, shocked, awed, some afraid. She saw Lord Garrett gripping his chair, his expression caught between terror and reluctant respect. Lady Isadora was smiling openly. Councillor Thane looked like he'd just witnessed a miracle. And Aldrich was looking at her like she'd hung the stars. My people, Rowan said, her voice somehow carrying despite her shaking. I stand before you not because I sought power, but because power sought me. The forest chose me not for my strength or my lineage, but for my heart. She gestured to the blooming flowers, the light still dancing through the hall. These gifts I've been given, they are not weapons. They are promises. Promises to heal what's broken. To see what's been overlooked. To use whatever power I possess to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Her eyes found Lord Garrett. I know some of you fear what I represent. Fear that I'll use these abilities to control or conquer. But I swear to you now, on my bond and my crown and everything I hold sacred, I will spend every day proving that power doesn't have to corrupt. That someone can hold the ability to reshape nature itself and still choose kindness. She looked at Aldrich then, her voice softening. Because I learned from the best king I know that true strength isn't about domination. It's about service. About lifting others up instead of standing on their backs. Aldrich's eyes were suspiciously bright. Rowan turned back to the crowd, lifting her chin. So yes, I'm a village girl from a place most of you have never heard of. Yes, I'm new to this world of politics and power. But I am your queen. And I will spend every moment I wear this crown earning the right to keep it. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then someone started clapping. Marin, blessed, wonderful Marin, who had somehow made the journey from Briar's Hollow and was standing in the back of the hall with tears streaming down her face, applauding like her life depended on it. Others joined in. First the villagers who'd traveled with her, then Lady Isadora, then more counselors, then the crowd itself until the entire hall rang with applause and cheers. Even Lord Garrett, after a long moment, brought his hands together in a single, decisive clap of acknowledgement. Rowan felt tears slip down her cheeks, but she didn't bother wiping them away. Aldrich stepped forward, taking her hand. The bond marks at their wrists flared in unison, silver light twining together like a promise made visible. My queen, he said, loud enough for all to hear. My mate. My equal in all things. Then, quieter, just for her, I am so proud of you. I couldn't have done this without you, she whispered back. You could have. His smile was fierce. But I'm grateful you didn't have to. The The celebration lasted well into the night, music and dancing, speeches and toasts, dignitaries from every realm vying for her attention. Rowan navigated it all with growing confidence, Aldrich at her side, whispering warnings about which counselors to trust and which compliments were genuine. But her favorite moment came hours later, when most of the formal guests had departed and only a small group remained in one of the palace gardens. Her mother had arrived just before the coronation, traveling with Kasha and the engineers who'd finished their work in Briar's Hollow. She sat now on a stone bench, talking animatedly with Lady Isadora about agricultural reforms, the two women finding unexpected common ground. Marin was dancing with one of Aldrich's younger guards, laughing freely. Even Lyra had relaxed slightly, a cup of wine in hand, as she stood watch with less military rigidity than usual. Rowan and Aldrich stood beneath an ancient oak tree, watching the scene with matching expressions of contentment. "Do you remember," Aldrich murmured, "when you told me fear was a luxury for those who have choices? In the forest. When you collapsed at my feet. I knew then," he said softly, "that you were different. That you'd change everything." "I didn't change you." Rowan leaned into him. "I just reminded you who you already were." "We changed each other," he corrected. "You showed me how to care beyond duty. I showed you how to be seen." Together, he gestured to the garden, to the palace, to the kingdom beyond. "We're building something better." Rowan thought about Briar's Hollow, about the bridge being rebuilt and the wells being reinforced. About the village council meeting regularly now, their voices finally heard. About the way even Lord Garrett had grudgingly admitted she might have potential. She thought about the crown on her head, not heavy like she'd feared, but light. Alive. A reminder that she'd been chosen not despite her past, but because of it. "Bram came to the coronation," she said suddenly, remembering the pale figure she'd glimpsed in the back of the hall. "I know." Aldrich's arms tightened around her. "I had guards watch him the entire time. If he'd tried anything." "He didn't. He just watched." Looking lost. She tilted her head up to meet Aldrich's gaze. "I felt nothing. No anger, no vindication. Just pity, maybe. He's still trapped in that village mindset, and I'm here." "You're here," Aldrich echoed. "Queen of the Nine Realms. Bonded to the Moonstone Forest. Possibly the most powerful woman alive." His smile turned wicked. "I imagine that's quite the comeuppance." "The best revenge," Rowan said with a grin, "is living so well they can't believe they ever doubted you. Then we're both remarkably revenged." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Ready for what comes next?" "What has come next?" "Everything." His eyes gleamed. "The Eastern Council will keep testing us. Other realms will send diplomats and spies. Your powers will keep growing, developing, revealing themselves. There will be challenges and threats and 100 problems we can't predict." Rowan groaned. "You're really selling this queen thing." "But," Aldrich continued, his voice softening, "we'll face it all together. You and me. Just like we faced the forest, the village, the council. We'll keep choosing each other, keep building something better, keep proving that power and kindness don't have to be enemies." Rowan turned in his arms to face him fully, the moonlight catching in her crown and making it glow. "You know what I think?" "Tell me." "I think leaving Briar's Hollow taught me how to survive." She reached up to cup his face. "But loving you taught me how to rise." Aldrich's smile was radiant. "And loving you taught me that being a king means more than wearing a crown. It means serving something greater than myself." "Each other," Rowan suggested. "Each other," he agreed. "And everyone who needs us to be better than we think we can be." He kissed her then, deep and sure and full of promise, not just for tonight, but for every tomorrow they'd face together. Around them, the garden bloomed. Silver light danced between their joined hands. And somewhere in the distance, wolves howled their blessing to the moon. Rowan had spent most of her life being told she was too soft, too quiet, too nothing to matter. But standing here in a palace garden, crowned and loved and finally certain of her place in the world, she knew the truth. She had always been enough. She just needed to find someone who could see it. And in finding him, in finding herself, she had become something no one expected. Not just a queen. but a woman who could hold power with gentle hands and still change the world. The girl from Briar's Hollow was gone. In her place stood Queen Rowan, keeper of forest magic, protector of the powerless, beloved of the Alpha King. And her story was only just beginning. The end.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out.